Under the burning sun, a stranger rides into Redemption Creek, his horse moving slow and steady across the dry and cracked land, the air thick with dust and silence that only a desert can hold. The town itself sits like a memory on the edge of nowhere, its wooden buildings leaning from years of wind and hardship, and its people watching from porches and windows, as if the arrival of a man they do not know might change the rhythm of their lives. The stranger is tall and broad-shouldered with eyes that seem to carry the weight of too many miles and too many choices behind him. The wind pulls at his long coat as he dismounts, tying his horse to a rail that looks ready to splinter under its own age. He says little and asks for nothing more than water and a place to rest his name. He gives as Cole Carter, though some in the saloon whisper they have heard that name before, whispered it with fear, back when Cole was known by another name, one carried by outlaws and men who lived by the gun. The preacher. Reverend Alden hears of the stranger before the man even finishes his drink in the saloon, for news travels fast, in a small town where gossip is more common than rain. The Reverend stands at the door of his church looking down. The street as Cole passes by each step, measured and heavy with the quiet of a man who has seen enough killing to make silence. His companion, the Reverend, has always taught his flock that every soul may find redemption, but even he feels unease at the sight of the man who carries himself like a ghost of violence. From the porch of the general store, the preacher's daughter, Clara, watches Cole with a curiosity she does not fully understand, her hands clutching the railing, though her eyes never leave the stranger. She is young yet strong-willed, her heart filled with a mixture of faith and restlessness that has no place in the narrow streets of Redemption Creek. She sees in Cole not the danger that others fear, but the mystery of a man who seems untouched by the judgment of others and yet marked by something deeper than sin. Cole stays at the old boarding house at the edge of town, paying in silver coins worn smooth by years in his saddlebag. That night he sits alone under the open sky, his campfire small and quiet, as if he does not wish to disturb the darkness. He looks toward the church steeple rising against the stars, and though he says nothing, his thoughts are heavy with memories of gun smoke and the faces of those he could not save. He does not pray, but he listens to the wind and wonders if a man like him can ever escape the shadow of his past. The next morning, the town stirs early, its people cautious but curious as Cole begins work helping a blacksmith. Repair wagon wheels. His strength and skill draw attention, and some of the men begin to speak of him with a mix of respect and wariness. Clara passes by carrying a basket for her father, and their eyes meet for the first time up close. It is not a moment of thunder or words, but something quiet and certain, like the first sign of rain after a long drought. In that small instant, Redemption Creek changes, though no one yet knows it. The stranger who came for peace will soon find that peace cannot exist without the courage to face the past, and the preacher's daughter will learn that even the hardest heart can still find grace in the hands of mercy. The days begin to pass with the slow rhythm of the desert sun rising and falling across the flat horizon, and the people of Redemption Creek start to grow used to the sight of Cole Carter. Though the whispers do not fade, they only soften behind closed doors and half-shut windows. Cole keeps to himself, working at the ranch owned by a widowed woman named Mrs. Turner, who needs a man strong enough to mend fences and break wild horses. He speaks little and drinks less, choosing quiet over company, but even in silence the shadow of his past lingers like a ghost that refuses to die at night. When the wind moves through the mesquite trees and the sound of coyotes echoes across the plains, Cole sits outside the bunkhouse with a tin cup of coffee and stares into the dark, his mind filled with the faces of men who once rode. Beside him, men who followed Jeb Rawlins, the outlaw leader who had once called Cole brother, until greed and blood tore their bond apart. The last time Cole saw Jeb was through the smoke of gunfire and betrayal, and though he rode away that night, leaving his gun buried deep in the desert, he knows deep down that the past is never buried for long. Meanwhile, Clara Alden finds herself drawn to the edges of the ranch. Whenever her errands take her that way, she tells herself it is chance that she passes by that she only means to deliver a message from her father to Mrs. Turner. Yet her eyes always find Cole and linger a moment too long. She sees the weariness in his face and the quiet sorrow behind his eyes, and something in her heart shifts. She begins to wonder if the man the town fears might be the one most in need of kindness. She starts leaving baskets of food at the church steps, meant for those in need, though she never says aloud that she hopes Cole will be among them. One evening, as the sun sets and the sky turns red as iron, Clara finds herself outside the blacksmith's shop, where Cole is helping mend a wagon wheel. He nods politely without a word, but there is a gentleness in his gesture that softens the space. Between them, they speak only briefly about the weather and the coming dust storm. Yet that small exchange carries the weight of something unspoken, something neither dares to name, for she is the preacher's daughter, and he is a man who carries the scent of gunpowder and regret. Not long after that night, the peace of redemption. Creek begins to tremble. Jeb Rawlins and his gang are seen riding through the neighboring valley, their reputation for cruelty known from one end of the territory. To the other, they rob trains and burn ranches, leaving nothing behind but fear. Word reaches the town by way of a passing trader, and the moment Cole hears Jeb's name, his blood runs cold. He knows Jeb will not stop until he has taken what he wants, and what he wants most is to find the man who once betrayed him. Cole tries to convince himself to leave before the storm reaches town, but Clara's voice echoes in his thoughts. From the small conversation they shared, her words about how even the worst man can find the light if he chooses to stand in it. He begins to wonder if running again would mean losing the last chance he has to make things right. The preacher warns his daughter to keep her distance from the stranger. Yet Clara's faith is stronger than fear, and she begins to pray not for safety but for courage, because deep within her she knows that the reckoning has already begun. The storm finally comes to Redemption Creek, not of dust or rain, but of men and vengeance. The gang, led by Jeb Rawlins, rides in before dawn, their horses kicking up clouds that settle heavy over the church steeple and the saloon door. The town wakes to the sound of hooves and shouting as Jeb and his riders tear through the main street, firing into the air and laughing at the fear they leave behind. Jeb sits high in his saddle, his face carved with cruelty and pride, his eyes searching for one man, the man who once rode beside him and then walked away. Cole hears the noise before the sun fully rises, and every muscle in his body tightens. He steps out of the bunkhouse and sees the smoke curling up from the edge of town, his heart beating. Slow and heavy, he has known this moment would come. He has known Jeb Rawlins would find him sooner or later. But the weight of it still cuts deep. He could ride away now, take his horse, and disappear into the desert again. But something in him refuses. Maybe it is the quiet memory of Clara's voice, or the small peace he has found in honest work. Whatever it is, it roots him to the ground. The preacher gathers the townsfolk inside the church, his voice calm, but his hands trembling as he tells them to stay quiet, to pray, to trust that good will overcome evil. Yet even he feels the doubt creeping into his faith when the gang begins demanding food and money and threatening to burn every building to the ground. Clara stands beside her father. Her heart pounding, she looks out the window and sees Cole walking slowly into town, his broad frame outlined by the morning light, and for the first time she feels not fear but certainty that he has come not to destroy, but to defend. Cole meets Jeb in the middle of the street, the air thick and still, the town holding its breath. Jeb grins the same grin Cole remembers from the days when they robbed and killed without a thought, and for a moment it feels like time folds back to the nights of whiskey and gunfire. But those days are gone. Jeb calls him a coward for running and a traitor for leaving, but Cole says nothing. He only looks at the man who was once his brother and knows Words will not mend what sin has broken, Jeb promises, to bring the town to its knees unless Cole gives himself up. But Cole knows that surrender will not save anyone. When Cole refuses, the gang begins their work of terror, smashing windows, overturning wagons, and firing shots into the air. The preacher steps outside to plead for mercy, but Jeb strikes him down with the butt of his gun. Clara screams, rushing to her father's side, and something inside Cole breaks wide open. The man who sought peace vanishes, and the outlaw who once lived by the gun returns, though, this time not for greed or vengeance, but for something pure and right. He takes up the rifle he buried when he first came to Redemption Creek and stands in the street as the gang circles around him. He moves like a man guided. By fate, each motion steady, each shot, a promise kept the townsfolk watch from behind doors and windows as Cole Carter, the man they feared, becomes the man who fights for them. The preacher, wounded but alive, looks up from the ground and sees not a sinner, but a savior made of dust and redemption. Clara stands beside her father, whispering prayers through tears as the echo of gunfire rolls across the desert, announcing that the reckoning has truly begun. The morning sun rises red over Redemption Creek, casting its light across broken windows and scattered dust. The town stands silent and trembling after the night of fire and blood. Jeb Rawlins and his men have taken refuge in the saloon, turning it into their fortress while the people hide in their homes, afraid to breathe too loud. Cole stands at the edge of the street, his hat low over his eyes, his body worn but unshaken. He has faced death before, but never with so much at stake. He looks toward the church where Clara and the wounded preacher wait, and something within him steadies like a calm before a storm. Inside the church, Clara tends to her father's wound with strips of cloth torn from her dress, her hands trembling but her spirit unbroken. The Reverend whispers that she must stay hidden, but she shakes her head, refusing to abandon the man outside who stands alone against the darkness. Her faith is no longer the kind that waits for miracles. It is the kind that walks into danger and trusts that light will follow. She tells her father that redemption is not just for those who pray, but also for those who fight to protect what is good. Cole walks down the street step by step, every echo of his boots cutting through the still air. Jeb watches from the saloon window, his grin sharp and bitter. He calls out for Cole to come and finish what was started years ago, and Cole answers with silence. He moves to the center of the street and calls for the townsfolk to stay down to keep their doors shut. Then he raises his rifle and fires once the bullet shatters a bottle on the saloon shelf behind Jeb, and in that moment the battle begins. Gunfire erupts through the quiet morning, glass splinters and wood cracks as the gang fires from the windows. Cole takes cover behind a water trough, his shots measured and true, each one finding its mark, though his shoulder burns from a bullet that grazes him. The blacksmith and a few brave townsmen join him, armed with old rifles and pistols, their courage sparked by the sight of a man who refuses to run. The preacher prays aloud from the church, his voice trembling but strong, filling the air with words of hope that cut through the sound of violence. Clara cannot stay hidden. She rushes out with a bucket of water and bandages, running from one man to another, helping those who fall, her face streaked with soot and tears. Yet she moves with purpose when Cole sees her. He shouts for her to go back, but she shakes her head and keeps moving, defiant and fearless. The sight of her gives him strength, and he rises from cover, walking straight toward the saloon bullets whistling past him. He kicks through the door and faces Jeb in the haze of gun smoke. The two men stare at each other like shadows from another life. Jeb taunts him, calls him soft for trading blood for mercy, but Cole's eyes hold only sorrow. He tells Jeb that this ends today not with revenge but with reckoning. Jeb draws first, and the echo of their gunfire rolls through the town when the smoke clears. Cole stands barely breathing, his gun lowered. Jeb lies still on the floor, the fight over, but the silence heavy. Outside, the people of Redemption Creek step into the sunlight, their fear lifting like morning mist. Clara runs to Cole, her eyes wide with both relief and grief, as she helps him to the church where the preacher waits. The town that once saw him as a stranger now sees him as something more, a man not without sin, but one who has found his way back through the fire. And as the day ends and the desert wind softens through the streets, Redemption Creek begins to breathe again, knowing that its peace was won not by angels, but by a man who dared to face his past. The night after the battle, the desert lies quiet under a silver moon. The wind drifts through the empty streets of Redemption Creek, carrying the faint scent of gunpowder and rain. The townsfolk move slowly through the wreckage, patching holes, sweeping glass, and burying the dead in silence. There is no celebration, only relief, and the fragile hope that morning will bring something better. Cole sits on the church steps, his hat in his hands, his shirt torn and dark with dried blood, his eyes fixed on nothing. He has won the fight, but his heart feels heavy with all that was lost. Inside the church, Clara kneels beside her father, who rests weak but alive, his voice low and steady, as he thanks the Lord for sparing the town. He tells Clara that she must go to Cole and speak what she carries in her heart. She hesitates, her hands trembling. She has never known how to put faith into words for a man who does not pray, but she knows now that redemption is not found in sermons alone. It lives in the choices that break and heal a soul. She steps outside into the cool night, her dress brushing against the dust as she walks toward the man who saved them. Cole looks up at her, his expression unreadable. She sits beside him without a word. The silence stretches between them like the space between two stars. Then she speaks softly, telling him that the town owes him everything, but more than that, she owes him her faith. She says he has proven that even a man born in shadow can walk in the light if he chooses to stand for what is right. Cole listens, his rough hands trembling slightly. He says he is no hero, that all he did was repay a debt long overdue. Clara shakes her head, saying that no man can undo the past, but he can decide what kind of story the future will tell. She takes his hand, and for the first time in years, he feels the weight of his guilt begin to lift, not vanish, but ease, like the first breath after a storm. The next morning, the sun rises gold over the desert, and the town gathers outside the church. Reverend Alden stands tall, though still weak, his voice steady as he speaks of forgiveness and the power of second chances. He tells his people that Redemption Creek is not just a name, it is a promise. Cole stands at the edge of the crowd, ready to leave his horse saddled and waiting. He believes his place is on the road, far from the peace he has helped restore. But Clara walks to him, her face calm, her eyes clear, and she tells him that peace is not something found by running, it is something built with steady hands and honest work. She asks him to stay to help rebuild the town, to lay new fences and raise new walls, and teach the children that courage is not in fighting, but in choosing mercy over hate. The crowd stands silent, waiting for his answer. Cole looks at her, at the church, at the people who once feared him, and for the first time he feels like he belongs. He unties his horse and removes the saddle, setting it gently on the ground. Then he turns back toward the town and nods once, a quiet promise. The preacher smiles. Clara's eyes fill with tears, and the wind carries the faint sound of the church bell ringing through the valley as the people begin to rebuild their home under the wide-open sky. Cole Carter walks into the morning light, no longer an outlaw, no longer a ghost, but a man redeemed.